In the annals of American crime, few figures have captivated the public imagination quite like Herman Webster Mudgett, better known by his alias H.H. Holmes. Often dubbed America's first serial killer, Holmes has become a central character in the dark folklore of the late 19th century, a charming con man who allegedly constructed a murder castle in Chicago during the 1893 World's Fair, luring victims to their deaths in a building designed for killing. But over a century later, historians and true crime experts continue to debate whether Holmes was truly the calculating murderer described by newspapers or whether he became a larger-than-life legend shaped by sensationalism and fear. The making of H.H. Holmes. Born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, in 1861, Holmes showed early signs of intelligence and manipulation. He graduated from the University of Michigan's medical school in 1884, where rumors circulated that he had stolen cadavers to commit insurance fraud. After moving to Chicago in 1886, he reinvented himself under the name H.H. Holmes and opened a pharmacy in Englewood. With charm, confidence, and cunning, Holmes quickly became a respected businessman. However, behind the polished facade, he was a fraudster, bigamist, and swindler. He married multiple women simultaneously, forged documents, and ran scams that defrauded both investors and insurance companies. It was this deceptive pattern of behavior that would ultimately escalate to murder. The Murder Castle. In 1892, Holmes began construction on a 3-story building at the corner of Wallace and 63rd Streets, later dubbed by the press as the Murder Castle. The structure's design was both strange and secretive, twisting corridors, windowless rooms, trapdoors, and hidden chutes. Holmes constantly fired and rehired contractors so that no single person would know the full layout, making it an ideal place to conceal his schemes. According to legend, the building featured gas chambers, acid vats, and cremation furnaces used to dispose of bodies. During the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, with thousands of visitors flooding into Chicago, Holmes allegedly rented rooms in his building to travelers and fairgoers, many of whom were never seen again. But while these stories are spine-chilling, the historical record tells a more complex tale. Much of what people believe about the murder castle came from newspaper exaggerations of the 1890s, a time when yellow journalism, scandal-driven reporting, was at its peak. Police investigations revealed that many so-called death traps were actually standard features of a boarding house, and no definitive architectural evidence of torture chambers or gas pipes for killing has ever been found. Still, the castle was undeniably strange and designed for secrecy, perhaps not to kill, but to hide Holmes's fraudulent schemes, stolen goods, and illicit activities. The real crimes. Holmes's most verifiable crimes involved fraud, manipulation, and murder for profit. His most infamous victim was Benjamin Petezel, a business partner with whom Holmes conspired to commit insurance fraud. In 1894, Holmes murdered Petezel in Philadelphia by knocking him unconscious and setting his body on fire, making it appear accidental. Even more disturbing, Holmes later murdered 3 of Petezel's children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, under the pretense of reuniting them with their father. These killings, confirmed by evidence and witness testimony, proved Holmes's capacity for calculated cruelty. After his arrest, authorities uncovered a trail of deception stretching across multiple states, forged documents, stolen property, fake businesses, and numerous aliases. Though Holmes confessed to 27 murders, many of those he named were later found alive. Historians now believe his actual body count lies somewhere between 9 and 12, still monstrous, but far from the hundreds claimed by contemporary newspapers. The media's role in building the legend. In the 1890s, America's media thrived on sensationalism. The Holmes case arrived at a time when the public appetite for shocking stories was insatiable. Newspapers described him as a fiend in human form, and his building as a castle of horrors. Reporters imagined Holmes as a calculating madman who built an industrial-scale death trap, killing fairgoers and selling their skeletons to medical schools. It was a narrative that blended fact, fiction, and fear, creating one of the earliest examples of the modern serial killer mythos. What made Holmes such a compelling villain was how he embodied the anxieties of his era. The industrial age had transformed American cities into sprawling, anonymous places filled with strangers. Holmes, a well-dressed, educated man who appeared entirely respectable, represented a new kind of threat, evil hidden in plain sight. Even after his execution, the press continued to embellish the story. Some claimed Holmes had experimented on victims like a scientist, others said his ghost haunted the ruins of his castle. In truth, much of the building was ordinary, but the story of a house of horrors was simply too good for newspapers to resist. In the late 19th century, when the modern American city was still young, one man's name became synonymous with evil itself: Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as H.H. Holmes. To many, he was the first serial killer in U.S. history, a man who built a murder castle in Chicago filled with hidden chambers, trapdoors, and devices for torture and death. To others, Holmes was more myth than murderer, his infamy inflated by a hungry press eager for sensational stories. But who was the real H.H. Holmes, and how much of his dark legend is based on truth? The Devil's Beginnings. Herman Webster Mudgett was born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, in 1861. From a young age, he showed a fascination with death and anatomy, traits that would later become central to his crimes. He studied medicine at the University of Michigan, where he was accused of stealing cadavers and using them to commit insurance fraud. Those early scams revealed his defining traits: charm, intelligence, and a chilling lack of empathy. After graduating, Mudgett adopted the name Drive H.H. Holmes and moved to Chicago in 1886. There, he quickly established himself as a successful businessman, working in a pharmacy and earning the trust of the local community. But beneath the surface, Holmes was already weaving a web of lies, deceit, and fraud. He married multiple women under different names, scammed investors, and forged documents to collect life insurance payouts. He was a con artist, but one with grand ambitions, and his biggest scheme would soon take physical form in the shape of his mysterious building on 63rd Street. The infamous Murder Castle. Holmes's three-story building in the Englewood neighborhood of Chicago would later become one of the most infamous structures in American history. Constructed in the early 1890s, it was part pharmacy, part hotel, and part labyrinth. Locals called it the Castle, unaware of what was allegedly taking place inside. The building featured maze-like corridors, trapdoors, and secret rooms, all designed under Holmes's direction. He frequently fired contractors mid-construction, ensuring that no one fully understood the building's layout. This strategy, likely meant to conceal his financial scams, later fueled stories that he was hiding torture chambers within its walls. When the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, the Chicago World's Fair, drew millions of visitors to the city, Holmes saw opportunity. Reports claim he lured young women seeking work or lodging to his hotel, only for them to vanish. The newspapers of the day described the castle as a place of horror: rooms rigged with gas lines for suffocation, acid baths for dissolving remains, and furnaces for burning bodies. Yet much of this came from sensational journalism rather than verified evidence. When police finally searched the building, they found bones, surgical tools, and a crematory, disturbing, but not proof of mass murder. Still, the lack of clarity allowed the legend to grow. Holmes himself fueled the mystery with his lies, changing his story repeatedly and playing into the public's appetite for a villain. Crimes of deception and murder. While the full truth of what happened inside the murder castle may never be known, Holmes's proven crimes are horrifying enough. His most documented murder was that of Benjamin Petezel, a business partner involved in an insurance scam. In 1894, Holmes killed Petezel in Philadelphia, staging the scene to look like an accident so he could collect the insurance payout. Even worse, Holmes went on to murder 3 of Petezel's children, deceiving the grieving family with false promises of reuniting them. Investigators later uncovered evidence of these murders across multiple states: Philadelphia, Toronto, and Indianapolis, confirming Holmes's cold-blooded nature. Holmes was eventually captured in Boston in November 1894 after being pursued by the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. During his trial, the true scale of his deceit emerged: dozens of aliases, forged documents, and fraudulent schemes. Though he confessed to 27 murders, many supposed victims were later found alive. Historians now estimate his real death toll between 9 and 12, still shocking, but far less than the hundreds claimed by newspapers. The media's dark obsession. The late 19th century was an era of yellow journalism, a form of reporting that valued scandal over fact. Newspapers like the New York World and the Chicago Tribune turned Holmes into a national sensation. They painted him as a brilliant but deranged scientist who built a death factory. Stories described him performing surgical experiments on victims, selling skeletons to medical schools, and laughing maniacally as he killed. In reality, these claims were largely unsupported. Holmes was indeed a murderer, but not a mad scientist or mass torturer. Still, the image of the murder castle and the devil in Chicago gripped the imagination of readers. Holmes became both America's first modern monster and a reflection of the fears of an age where anonymity and urban sprawl made evil seem omnipresent. When Holmes was executed in 1896, newspapers described him as the beast incarnate. Yet even in death, his myth only grew stronger. The birth of a legend. The fascination with Holmes never faded. In 1937, a fire destroyed what remained of the murder castle, but by then, the legend was far more enduring than the bricks. In the 21st century, his story found new life through books and television, most notably Erik Larson's The Devil in the White City, which intertwined Holmes's crimes with the grandeur of the Chicago World's Fair. But historians today continue to ask, how much of Holmes's reputation was real, and how much was created by the media? The answer lies somewhere in between. Holmes was unquestionably a killer, driven by greed, arrogance, and a lack of conscience, but not the prolific, mechanical murderer of legend. In the next part, we'll separate the sensational myths from the historical truth, exploring how H.H. Holmes became a mirror for America's darkest fears. CO title: H.H. Holmes, Serial Killer or Media Myth. Pipe, History This Week, Part 1. CO description: Discover the rise of H.H. Holmes, the man behind Chicago's infamous murder castle. Was he truly America's first serial killer, or a myth born from media hysteria? Keywords: H.H. Holmes, Murder Castle, Serial Killer, Chicago World's Fair, True Crime, American History, Herman Webster, Yellow Journalism, History Documentary. Hashtags: Hashtag H.H. Holmes, Hashtag Murder Castle, Hashtag True Crime History, Hashtag American History, Hashtag History This Week, Hashtag Serial Killer Myth. H.H. Holmes, Serial Killer or Media Myth. History This Week, Part 2, 1000 words. When H.H. Holmes was executed in 1896, many Americans believed that evil itself had been hanged. The newspapers had crafted an image of Holmes as a calculating genius, a man who turned architecture into an instrument of death. But as modern historians have uncovered, much of Holmes's terrifying legend was built not by his crimes, but by the media that sensationalized them. So who was the real H.H. Holmes, and what does his story tell us about how America creates its monsters? The myth of the murder castle. After Holmes's arrest, newspapers described his Chicago building as a maze of horror: trapdoors, gas lines, dissection tables, and acid pits. It was called a castle of death, and even compared to medieval torture chambers. Yet, when police and later investigators examined the structure, they found little evidence to support these lurid tales. While there were indeed hidden rooms and strange architecture, the layout appeared more chaotic than sinister. Many odd features were the result of Holmes's habit of firing workers mid-project to avoid paying them, creating a patchwork design that seemed mysterious after the fact. The image of a building specifically designed for murder came almost entirely from imaginative reporters and later, pulp writers. The real horror of Holmes's story was psychological: his manipulation of victims' trust, his ability to lie convincingly, and his cold detachment from human life.